They left me out of their will, calmly walking away from my family's betrayal. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I got the message from my parents. They wanted me to come over for something important. Nothing in the message sounded urgent or alarming, but there was a tone of finality that I couldn't quite explain. So, I drove over with a mix of curiosity and concern. I wasn't prepared for what would come next. They sat me down in the living room, across from my two siblings, who were already there. No small talk, no warm welcome, just straight to the point. We've updated our will, my mother began. My father nodded, almost rehearsed. We just wanted to let you know that everything will be going to your brother and sister. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. Everything? Not a share, not a sentimental item, not a mention, just nothing. I sat still, letting the words sink in. My siblings looked away. My mother continued speaking, explaining that I seemed independent enough, that I always figured things out on my own, and they didn't want me to feel burdened by responsibilities tied to the estate. The justifications kept coming, and I kept nodding silently. No anger, no yelling, just clarity. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't a decision made overnight. It was something they had thought through. And if that was how they truly felt, if that's how they valued my place in the family, then so be it. I thanked them for their honesty, stood up, and quietly walked out. No dramatic exit, no accusations, just peace. That drive home was one of the quietest moments of my life, and yet, one of the most freeing. I started reflecting on everything, the years I showed up, supported them, made sacrifices, and suddenly I understood that love isn't always reciprocated. Sometimes, the people you give the most to are the ones who see you the least. I didn't call or text for weeks. I gave myself space, and in that space, I built something better. I focused on my own growth, surrounded myself with people who saw me, really saw me, and respected me for who I am, not for what I could give. Months later, my siblings reached out. They said things didn't feel right without me. That family dinners were too quiet. That mom cried sometimes, but I kept my distance. I had no bitterness, only boundaries. I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I was simply done trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. Forgiveness came, but not reconciliation. And that's okay, because not every wound needs to be reopened. Some just need time, space, and silence to fully heal. I share this story not for pity, but for anyone who's ever felt unseen by their own blood. You are not alone, and you are not the problem. Sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is walk away, calmly, quietly, and let them sit with their choices while you build the life you deserve. A life filled with people who choose you, every single day. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the events that had transpired. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a quiet contemplation. I began to recall moments from my childhood, instances where I had felt like an outsider within my own family. There were times when my achievements were met with lukewarm responses, while my siblings' accomplishments were celebrated with enthusiasm. These memories, once buried, now surfaced with clarity, providing context to the recent revelation. I realized that the exclusion from the will was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a long-standing pattern. This understanding, while painful, brought a sense of closure. I no longer felt the need to seek validation from those who had consistently overlooked me. Instead, I turned my focus inward, nurturing my passions and investing in relationships that offered genuine support and appreciation. I took up activities that brought me joy, surrounded myself with friends who valued me, and pursued goals that aligned with my true self. In doing so, I discovered a newfound sense of purpose and contentment. The journey was not without its challenges, but each step reinforced my resilience and self-worth. I came to accept that sometimes, the family we're born into may not provide the acceptance we seek, but we have the power to create our own communities of love and understanding. This realization was liberating, allowing me to release lingering resentment and embrace a future defined by authenticity and self-compassion. As time moved forward, I noticed subtle changes in how I carried myself. There was less urgency to prove my worth, less emotional weight dragging behind every interaction. I began waking up with clarity, no longer replaying old conversations or wondering what I could have done differently to be enough for them. That longing, the ache for parental approval, slowly began to dissolve. It wasn't that the pain vanished entirely, but I was learning to sit with it, to honor it without letting it dictate my choices. I poured my energy into building something of my own. I found strength in meaningful work, in showing up for myself every day, in the quiet satisfaction of small victories that didn't need to be flaunted or praised. People around me started noticing too, not in a dramatic way, but in how I listened more intently, how I spoke with conviction yet softness, how I became a little more grounded, a little more whole. I was growing, not in spite of the betrayal, but perhaps because of it. Losing what I thought I needed forced me to uncover what truly sustained me: my principles, my compassion, my voice. In letting go of the illusion that family had to look or feel a certain way, I created space for a deeper truth to emerge. I wasn't alone. There were others who had walked this path too: friends, mentors, strangers who became chosen family. In their stories, I found validation. In their kindness, I found healing. Slowly, I began to rebuild the definition of what family meant to me. It was no longer about shared blood or legal documents. It was about loyalty, respect, and the consistent choice to show up for one another with love. I started to understand that sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies or distant strangers. They come from the ones we trust most, the ones who are supposed to protect us. And as painful as that realization is, it's also incredibly freeing. Because once I accepted that my worth wasn't defined by their acceptance, I stopped chasing it. I no longer rearranged myself to fit into a mold they carved without asking who I truly was. I began giving myself permission to feel proud, not because someone else applauded, but because I had survived. I had gotten up each day, built a life from scratch, and continued walking forward when it would have been easier to give up. There were still moments that caught me off guard. A holiday where I'd scroll through social media and see photos of my siblings smiling beside my parents, or family announcements I learned about from distant relatives, not direct calls. But those moments, rather than pull me back, became reminders of how far I'd come. They used to sting with longing. Now, they stirred quiet reflection. It wasn't that I stopped caring. It was that I stopped waiting. Waiting for them to call, waiting for them to see me, waiting for the apology that would likely never come. Instead, I wrote my own closure, not in words, but in the life I built. A life rooted in truth, shaped by resilience, and rich with the kind of peace that only comes from walking through fire and still choosing softness. I remember one quiet morning when I was sipping coffee by the window, the sun warming the room in a way that felt almost sacred. And I thought to myself, this, right here, is what healing looks like. It's not loud or flashy. It's not some grand declaration. It's a soft unfolding. It's waking up and realizing that the weight on your chest is lighter, that your smile comes a little easier, that the voices of doubt that used to echo in your mind now barely whisper. I had started journaling around that time, not with the goal of documenting pain, but of recording growth. I wrote about the people who had stepped into my life and shown me kindness without condition. I wrote about my small victories: landing a new client, making a friend in a new city, learning how to cook something that reminded me of childhood without the bitterness attached. Each entry became a thread in the tapestry I was weaving, not of the life I had planned, but of the life I was learning to cherish. I didn't notice it all at once, but I had stopped seeing myself as the victim. I was no longer the person who was left out of a will, forgotten in family photos, or spoken of like a disappointment. I was just, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. One evening, about a year after that terrible day at my parents' house, I received a letter. It was from my mother. Her handwriting was unmistakable, neat, deliberate, and emotionally distant, just like her. For a moment, I considered not opening it. I had made so much progress in moving on, and I didn't want to be pulled back into old wounds. But something inside me whispered, "You're strong enough now." So, I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a proper explanation. It was more of a justification. She spoke of expectations, of duty, of how she and my father had always seen my siblings as the ones who carried the family name. There was an undertone of regret, but it was buried under layers of pride. The letter ended with a line that stuck with me. "I hope one day you understand that we did what we thought was best." I folded the paper slowly and placed it back in the envelope, not out of anger, but with clarity. They hadn't written to repair the relationship. They had written to make peace with themselves. And that's when it hit me. I had been waiting for validation from people who had never truly seen me. And now that I no longer needed it, I finally saw how much it had held me back. So, I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because I had already said everything I needed to. By building a life that felt whole. As time passed, I began to notice something incredible. Life wasn't waiting for me to heal before giving me opportunities. Things started aligning in ways I never expected. I found a new sense of clarity, and with that came new possibilities. I joined a community group that focused on local volunteer work, something I had always been passionate about, but never had the time to pursue. It was amazing how much that simple shift in focus brought me joy. The people I met there were kind, generous, and accepting. There were no expectations, no burdens of family dynamics or past hurts. It was simply people coming together to help one another. And then there was the job opportunity one had turned down years ago. the one I'd set aside because I felt it wasn't what my parents would want or what was expected of me. I had hesitated for so long, thinking about the path that they had laid out for me, the life they wanted me to live. But something had changed inside of me. I no longer felt trapped by their plans or by my past. So, I called the company back. I put myself out there, and it wasn't easy, but I was ready. I landed the job. It was everything I'd ever wanted, a role that allowed me to travel, to grow, and most importantly, to make an impact. In that moment, I realized how much I had been holding on to old wounds, expecting my parents' approval, chasing after their version of success, and constantly questioning my worth. But life wasn't about their expectations anymore. It was about mine. It felt strange at first, building a life without their approval, without that constant pressure that had once defined every decision I made. But slowly, it began to feel more and more natural. And soon, the weight I had been carrying for so long felt lighter. The bitterness that once clouded my thoughts began to dissipate, replaced with a quiet sense of pride. I had become my own person, not defined by their choices or their judgment, but by my own dreams and my own actions. But it wasn't until one day, years later, that I fully understood just how far I had come. Years later, I found myself standing at a crossroads again. It was unexpected. Life had taken me on a journey I hadn't anticipated, but somehow, it had brought me to this point of reflection. I was sitting on a bench in a park, watching the sunset, when it hit me. My past, everything that had once held me back, everything I had tried to bury, was no longer a burden. It was part of who I had become, but it no longer defined me. The next phone call I received would change everything. It was from my mother. "Are you free for a coffee?" she asked. "We need to talk." I hesitated, wondering what she could possibly want to talk about. After all these years, the things that had been left unsaid still lingered. The words they had said to me years ago still echoed in my mind. But I agreed. I was ready for anything at this point. We met at a small cafe, one of those cozy, quiet places that had been around for ages. She looked a little older, a little softer, but still the same woman who had once held all the power in my life. As I sat down across from her, I could tell something was different. "I'm sorry," she said, after a long silence, "for everything." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't expecting this. I had come to terms with my past, but hearing those words, directly from her, took me off guard. She continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about how I treated you. I was wrong, and I see that now. I was so focused on what I thought was best for you. I never stopped to listen to what you needed, and for that, I am truly sorry." I sat there, quietly processing everything she said. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel resentment. Instead, I felt a deep sense of understanding, of closure. "Thank you," I finally said. "It's taken me a long time to get here, but I've forgiven you, and I've forgiven myself." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us understanding that this conversation had been a long time coming. It was the first time in years that I felt truly at peace with my parents, with my past. That day, as I walked out of that cafe, I realized that life wasn't about holding on to grudges or waiting for someone else to give me the validation I craved. It was about moving forward, about finding peace in the present and embracing the future, no matter how uncertain it may seem. I had done the hard work. I had built a life on my terms, one decision at a time. And in that moment, I knew that nothing could take that away from me. I was no longer the person I had been, the person lost in the expectations of others. I was someone who had finally found their own voice, their own path. As time passed, I found myself thriving in ways I had never imagined. My career took off in a way I had only dreamed of. I met incredible people, friends, mentors, even a partner who saw me for who I truly was, not for the person my family had wanted me to be. And then one day, I received a message from my father. After years of not hearing much from him, he reached out with a simple message. "I'm proud of you. I always have been, even if I didn't show it." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it meant the world to me. I had done it. I had built my own life, my own success. And it didn't matter if anyone else saw it now. Standing in front of my parents' house, I reflect on how far I've come. The journey wasn't easy, but it was mine. It was a journey of self-discovery, of learning to let go of the past, and of embracing the future. And now, I'm ready for whatever comes next, because I know I can handle it. I've built my life from the ground up, and nothing, not even the weight of old expectations, can hold me back anymore.